Hello, this is a tutorial for absolute beginners. I'm doing this because I get positive responses to tutorials which are, in my perspective, very simple, like answering the questions, can you animate and keyframe components of objects or just objects? I know there's a huge demand for very advanced things like encloth, collision objects and parameters. But I see that there's a demand for absolute beginners who need to get acquainted with the interface, which may look a little bit intimidating. So let's get started with this little intro here. So once you've installed the totally free student version of Maya, in this case 2018, in later years it will of course be 19, 20, etc. But basically it will stay the same. I've known Maya since version 1 and it's basically still the same. It's more overloaded now these days because, well, whatever. The center is of course the 3D scene, and we start with the mouse interactions where we can move around this scene. The key on the keyboard of your computer is the Alt key. Press and hold the Alt key, and then with the left mouse button you rotate around the scene. You have like a virtual camera which is called perspective, and by pressing and holding Alt and the left mouse button you can just rotate around the scene. When you use the middle mouse button, you move the thing around up and down, left and right, but not in a rotational way. When you use Alt, you press and hold the Alt key and the right mouse button, you zoom in and out. You can use the scrolling wheel on the mouse as well, and of course everything works with a tablet, graphics tablet as well. So this is what you need to get acquainted with. We will eventually work in the scene all the time. That means all the movements here will take place all the time. We'll look from the back to the front of an object, etc. So Alt, left mouse button, middle mouse button and right mouse button is absolutely crucial to know when you work with Maya. Well, this is the view we're working in, and there are other views where you can land under certain circumstances, and you reach them by pressing the space bar and not holding it, just clicking the space bar. This is what we see. We see 4 windows now. This is the window where we came from, this is the top view, this is the front view, this is the side view, and in many circumstances you might want to look at the scene exactly from the top in order to distribute objects very precisely. So you need that view from time to time. When you hover with the mouse over it and quickly press the space bar, you get the top window in the full resolution here. Now you press the space bar again and hover the mouse here, and then you're back where you came from. At the left side of the screen is what is called the outliner. It is basically a list of all the objects in the scene. Currently there's a default light set, for example. Let's not care about it. Once we've created objects of our own in the scene, they will all appear here. And in order to get more space, click on this icon, and when you can't see the outliner, the list of objects, just click here and it reappears. So that's for this view here and this side here. Now let's create an object. You can create objects with a create menu here. All kinds of objects basically, NURBS, primitives, etc. But I think for a beginner it's good to actually create an object with an icon, and the icons are in this section here. For example, curves, surfaces, you see these things. This is a sphere, this is a cube. When you go to polygon modeling, you see even more objects here. Text, for example. Sculpting doesn't provide you with geometry, it's about manipulating geometry. Never mind, let's go to curves and surfaces and click this icon. And then a sphere appears in the scene, and it's here in the outliner. Now, remember the rotation, Alt left mouse button. This is the rotation around the sphere. If you want to get closer to it and focus the camera exactly to rotate around it, press the key F. F stands for focus. Now when we Alt left mouse button, we're very close and we can rotate around the scene. We see the back and the front. Alt key and middle mouse button moves it to the left in this case. In order to see it properly and to circle around it properly, press F again and then you're back here. Zoom out like this with the right mouse button. So here's the sphere. The sphere has its appearance here in the outliner. That's the object, the sphere. On the right hand side you see either the so-called channel box or the attribute editor. It depends on what you see and what you click. Control A brings up the attribute editor. Press Control A again and you get the channel box. They're basically sisters and brothers because they show details about the object. You can, for example, for the sphere, which is currently selected, translate it from Y, which is the height where it is, from 0 to 10. Let's just type in 10 here, and it's gone. Let's zoom out a little bit, and it's up here. This is what we did. We exactly moved it 10 units up. You could do this by hand as well, and that's what I'm going to show you next. Very important too. There are 3 keys on the keyboard which are neighbors: W, E and R. Just check your keyboard now. W, E and R. W, press it just briefly, gives you the translation arrows. So you can move it back down here. And in the channel box you see you actually moved it almost to 0, but not exactly. You could type in 0 now and it would jump to exactly 0. So the W key gives you the translation arrows where you can move the object around. Okay? And here you see the values change. The translation X, Y and Z are now at a different value here. And they change all the time while you move the object up and down, left and right, back and forth. So the key next to W is E. Press E. This gives you the rotation. So you can rotate the sphere in all 3 dimensions. And the key R is for scaling. So you scale it up and down. I'm always using the left mouse button here, the standard mouse button, to do these manipulations. If you make it very small and want to see it precisely, press the key F, focus. And here you are, and then you can rotate around the sphere which you've rotated and translated and scaled. Okay, next important key, and I know it's a little bit much for an absolute beginner, but these things you can watch this video tutorial again if you like, but they are important. F8 is the next important key. When you press F8, you change from the object selection to the component selection. All objects in Maya are made of components. They're not just, it's not just a sphere, it has components, little dots in this case. So if you left mouse button select these points here and you go to the W, which is the translation tool, then you can move just the components around in the scene. So that's the key F8. And once you're done with the component motion, you can scale it, press R, scale it like this. When you press F8 again, you're back in object mode. So you will now scale the whole object or rotate the whole object or translate with the key W the whole object. Okay. Now, under these icons, you find lots of things you can do. Most of them have to do with building geometry or manipulating geometry in a very special way. But this is basically how you introduce geometry into the scene. The next key you need to learn is S. S stands for Set Keyframe. Since this is an animation package, we need animation, moving or changing objects. You can change the colors with keyframes, you can change the position, which we'll do now. This down here is the so-called timeline. The timeline tells you we're currently at frame 1, which means at the very beginning of an animation. 25 is about 1 second, 50 is about 2 seconds, etc. Further down you have ways to extend that range, which is currently ending at 120. So let's go, for example, to frame 10. And we have this object here, and we press the key S. You see a little stroke appear here, a little marker in red, which means at frame 10, which is about half a second, this object is fixated there. It's sitting there. Now when you go to, say, frame 60 and move the object here to the back with the key E, remember you can rotate it like this so it lies flat on the ground. You press S again, you see another red line appearing here, and now you use these controls to run the animation. Go back to the very beginning and now press play. So that's what you did, and it loops after frame 120, it jumps back to the beginning. So this is what animation with keyframes is all about. There's another realm in Maya which deals with dynamic animations, which are independent of keyframes because they rely on gravity, etc. But that's too complex for now. So the next thing I want to show you is this menu set here in the top left. It currently shows rendering. Probably when you start Maya the first time, it shows modeling. The modeling menu set is different from the rigging, animation, FX, rendering, etc. menu set. And under modeling, for example, you find menus here which are different from when you're under, say, animation. Here with surfaces, now here you see mesh, visualize, playback, because that's about animation. When you go to rendering, you see new menus appear here as well. Lighting, shading, texturing, render, tune, stereo rendering, etc. And it depends on what you want to do. When you start modeling a scene, use the modeling menu set, and you have, for example, lots and lots of things for changing or creating such surfaces. Now that's the last thing I'm going to show you in this context here, and it's about coloring. We need color for an object. There are several ways to give this object a color, but I want to introduce the right mouse button context menu. So with this object selected, press the right mouse button. And you see lots of things you can do, but down here is materials, and you need to go to assign new materials, which brings up a quite complex looking menu set. But just go to any of these things which look inviting to you. Hair tube shader would not be so inviting currently, I guess, or the hair physical shader, but go for example to a Fong, and now you see that the object is a little bit more shiny. And in order to give it another color, right mouse click, Material Attributes, and now you see here in the attribute editor lots and lots of entries, but the top one is the color. Click on it and change it to red, and it will change to red. So now we have an animation which we can play back, and our object is red. You know how to select components. You know how to navigate around your whole scene. And the final thing is, if you create other objects like this, move it back here, like this, move it back there, and like this, move the cylinder back here. And now you want to see them all, press the key A, all. And don't feel intimidated by lots of icons. Everybody who has dealt with Maya for years is an expert in their own realm, and most of us don't know much about this or that. For example, there are specialists in XGen, but others don't know anything about XGen. So see you later, and keep going in 3D.